His hands were still shaking when he set down the robot's leg, not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility that had settled into his bones 3 years ago. Jason Williams stared at the small mechanical figure on their kitchen counter, a science project his 7-year-old son Tyler had built on from spare parts and determination. One leg dangled by a thread of tape, a simple fix for most, but a symbol of everything Jason fought to hold together. The Mission District Apartment barely contained their lives, small enough that only one person could stand at the counter at a time. But Jason had learned to make it work. He always made it work. Ever since that rainy afternoon when his best friend Rachel's car had skidded off the road, leaving her son with no one but the godfather she'd named in her will, a single gay man in a system that questioned his right to parent at every turn. The smell of scrambled eggs filled the tiny kitchen as Tyler shuffled in, hair wild from sleep, eyes bright with the resilience only children possess. "Is my robot fixed, Dad?" His small voice carried the echo of Rachel's optimism. Jason smiled, smoothing Tyler's unruly hair. "Good as new, buddy. Ready to save the world one Lego at a time." He didn't mention the email from West Bay Tech sitting in his inbox. Hints of another round of layoffs swirling through the office halls. Didn't mention the asthma medication bills piling up, or Mrs. Chen's warning about the landlord's plans to raise rent again. Instead, he focused on today's interview at Silicon Tech, the final round after 6 months of preparation, competing against 200 applicants for a position that would triple his salary and provide the healthcare Tyler needed. "If you get the new job, can we get pizza every Friday?" Tyler asked, juice dripping from the only uncracked cup they owned. The question hit Jason in the chest. Such a small dream for a 7-year-old. "When I get the job," he corrected gently, "we'll get pizza every Friday. Promise." At the apartment door, Mrs. Chen arrived with her usual timing and warmth, the only neighbor who had stood by Jason through the custody battle, who ignored the whispers from others about that gay man raising a child alone. She slipped Tyler an almond cookie and winked at Jason. "You knocked them dead at that fancy company today." Walking Tyler to her apartment, Jason felt the familiar ache of doubt. 3 years of fighting the system to honor Rachel's wishes, of proving himself worthy against social workers who questioned his motives, of enduring sidelong glances at parent-teacher conferences. 3 years of midnight asthma attacks in tight budgets and explaining to a little boy why some families look different than others. But looking at Tyler's small hand and Mrs. Chen's weathered one, Jason remembered Rachel's last text message before the accident. "If anything happens to me, you're the only one I trust to raise him with the same love and zero judgment." The gray suit hung on the bathroom door, slightly worn at the cuffs but pressed and ready. It was the only suit he owned, and today it had to make him look like someone worth promoting to the big leagues of Silicon Valley. Someone worthy of Silicon Tech, the company that could finally give Tyler the life he deserved, not just the one they could afford. Have you ever made a sacrifice that seemed impossible at the time? Follow Heart Stories to discover how one decision can change everything. Even when the world seems determined to push you down, the BART train rumbled beneath San Francisco, packed with Monday morning commuters. Jason found a window seat and reviewed his portfolio one last time, innovative software solutions he'd created, efficiencies he'd implemented, problems he'd solved with elegant code while colleagues gave up. This was his ticket out of barely making it. This was his chance to finally give Tyler the stability they both deserved. His mind drifted to that morning, Tyler's serious face as they'd pinky promised over Pizza Fridays. Mrs. Chen's confident nod that somehow made the universe feel slightly less hostile. 6 months of late nights studying Silicon Tech's projects after Tyler went to bed, rehearsing answers to every possible technical question, pushing through 2 grueling interview rounds. Now only 15 minutes and 2 city blocks separated him from changing their lives forever. Market Street Station appeared at 9:15. Jason gathered his portfolio and stood as the train slowed. Through the window, he could see the Silicon Tech building rising above the street, glass and steel and promise. 15 minutes until his life could finally shift towards something better. The doors opened and the world began to shake. At first, it felt like the train was still moving some trick of momentum. Then the shaking intensified. The platform buckled beneath his feet. People screamed. Overhead lights swayed violently. Glass shattered in the distance with a sound like 1,000 wind chimes breaking at once. Earthquake? The strongest San Francisco had felt since 1989, they would later say. Jason grabbed a support column as his portfolio fell, papers scattering across the trembling concrete. His heart raced, thoughts immediately flying to Tyler and Mrs. Chen, but they were inland, safer than downtown. The shaking stopped abruptly, leaving behind an eerie quiet broken only by distant sirens and people calling out to each other. Jason checked his watch, 9:20. 10 minutes to get to the interview. The Silicon Tech building was still standing, just 100 meters away. He could still make it if he ran. He bent to gather his scattered papers, shoving them back into the folder with trembling fingers. That's when he heard a sound that cut through the chaos, quiet yet desperate. "Help, please, someone help me." The voice came from an alley between two buildings, barely more than a whisper. Jason froze, hands still on his portfolio. He should keep walking, should get to that interview. 6 months of preparation, 2 rounds already passed. This was everything. But his feet carried him toward the alley before his brain could talk him out of it. There, half hidden behind fallen debris, pinned beneath a concrete slab that had broken away from a building's facade, was a man. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, wearing an expensive black suit now covered in dust. Blood seeped from a gash on his forehead, and his left leg was trapped beneath the concrete at an angle that made Jason's stomach turn. The man's eyes found his through the settling dust, wide, intelligent, terrified. "Please," he whispered, "I can't feel my leg." Jason dropped his portfolio. He was moving before he could think, before he could calculate the quizom. He knelt beside the man, assessing the situation with the same methodical precision he brought to engineering problems. The concrete slab was maybe 200 pounds, resting on the man's shin. The blood flow suggested arterial damage. He needed help now. "I'm Jason, I've got you. You're going to be fine." His voice remained steady even as his mind raced through the impossible math. 5 minutes until his interview started versus the stranger who might not have 5 minutes to live without help. "You look like there's somewhere you need to be," the injured man managed, his eyes taking in Jason's suit. "Nowhere important," Jason lied, pulling out his phone to call 911. The operator's voice was harried, overwhelmed. Multiple emergencies across the city, ambulances dispatched but delayed. Could he stay with the victim? "Provide first aid." Jason looked at his watch. 9:25. 5 minutes until the interview started. He thought about Tyler's face at breakfast, about pizza on Fridays, about the apartment they could barely afford, about the chance he'd worked so hard for slipping away with every passing second. And then he looked at the stranger, trapped beneath concrete, whose eyes held his like he was the only solid thing in a world that had just tried to shake itself apart. "I'm staying," he told the operator. "Tell me what to do." He used his navy tie as a tourniquet, wrapping it tight above the wound. He found pieces of metal and wood to create a lever system, gradually lifting the concrete enough to free the man's leg. His suit jacket became a pillow. His dress shirt, torn into strips, became bandages. "What's your name?" Jason asked, trying to keep the man conscious. "Matthew," came the weak reply before his eyes rolled back. Jason held Matthew's hand, checking his pulse every 30 seconds. Watching for the ambulance he could hear but couldn't see. He thought about the interview panel waiting 14 floors above them, about the 6 months of preparation, about the opportunity evaporating with every minute. But he didn't let go of Matthew's hand. When we face the choice between personal gain and another's survival, the decision reveals not just who we are, but who we've always been beneath the masks we wear for the world. The ambulance arrived at 9:55. By then, Jason's white shirt was soaked with blood that wasn't his, and his hands were covered in concrete dust. The paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, loading Matthew onto a stretcher while praising Jason's quick actions. You likely saved his leg. Maybe his life, one said. Matthew's eyes fluttered open once more before the doors closed, scanning Jason's face as if committing every detail to memory. Standing in the alley alone, Jason looked down at himself. Suit ruined, tie gone, shirt destroyed. He looked like a man who'd been through a war. Still, he walked to the Silicon Tech building anyway, only to find the lobby in chaos. People evacuating, security guards directing traffic. A harried receptionist barely glanced at him. All interviews canceled due to the earthquake. You'll receive an email. That email arrived before he'd even made it home. Due to today's events, your scheduled interview has been canceled. We will not be rescheduling you at this time. Not postponed, canceled. They'd found their candidate, or the position was gone. 6 months of work, erased by 15 minutes of compassion. The weeks that followed blurred together. West Bay Tech announced a 30% reduction in workforce. The startup's funding had dried up in the latest market correction. Despite being a senior engineer, Jason's position wasn't guaranteed. He took on freelance projects at night after Tyler went to bed, building websites and debugging code for anyone who would pay, while hiding his growing worry behind bedtime stories and weekend trips to the park. He didn't regret saving. Matthew couldn't regret it, but each night, staring at bills spread across the kitchen table, the weight of consequence settled deeper. Tyler needed new inhalers. The rent increased next month. The custody arrangement stipulated financial stability. Then, exactly 3 weeks after the earthquake, Jason sat in Blue Bottle Coffee during his lunch break, hunched over his laptop. Someone sat at the next table, the soft tap of a cane against the floor drawing his attention. Jason glanced up reflexively and felt his heart stutter. It was him, the man from the earthquake. Matthew. He looked different now. Professional and polished, hair neatly styled. The gash on his forehead healed to a faint scar. He walked with a slight limp, leaning on an elegant cane, but he was alive and whole and sitting 20 feet away. Matthew didn't notice him at first, focused on his phone, sunlight catching on his expensive watch. The barista called a name, and Matthew stood carefully, reaching for his drink. As he turned, their eyes met across the coffee shop, and Jason watched recognition dawn in his expression. "It's you," Matthew said, his voice no longer weak but rich with surprise. "I've been looking everywhere for you. The police couldn't find you. The security footage was too blurry. I couldn't remember your name." "Jason," he supplied simply. "How's your leg?" Matthew stared at him, something like wonder crossing his face. "You saved my life, and you're asking about my leg like we bumped into each other at a conference." He gestured to an empty chair. "Please, can we talk?" They always sat, and Matthew told him what the doctors had said, that without Jason's tourniquet and quick thinking, he would have lost his leg, maybe his life. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "but I've been wondering, you were dressed for something important that day. Where were you going?" "A job interview," Jason admitted. "Final round at Silicon Tech. I'd passed 2 rounds, worked for 6 months to get there." Matthew's expression changed, something shifting behind his eyes. "Silicon Tech," he repeated quietly. "What position?" "Senior Solutions Architect in their cloud division." Matthew closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them, they glistened with unshed tears. "Jason, I'm Matthew Montgomery. I'm the HR director at Silicon Tech. I was on my way to work when the earthquake hit." The words hung in the air between them. Jason felt like the ground was shifting again, like the earthquake had never truly stopped. "You were coming to interview with me," Matthew said, his voice breaking slightly. "And instead, you chose to save me." "I didn't know," Jason replied, the irony washing over him in waves. "When I saw you in that alley, I didn't recognize you from company photos. I just saw someone who needed help." "I know." Matthew reached across the table, his hand hovering near Jason's but not quite touching. "That's what makes this so..." He broke off, shaking his head. "You gave up everything to help me, and you didn't even know who I was." They sat in silence. the weight of coincidence and consequence settling between them. "I want to make this right," Matthew finally said. "I want to give you another chance at that interview. The position is still technically open." "No." The word came out sharper than Jason intended. "Thank you, but no, I can't accept that." "Why not?" "You earned that interview. You competed through 2 rounds. The earthquake cost you an opportunity you deserved." "Maybe," Jason leaned back. "But if I interview now, I'll never know if I got the job because I was qualified or because I saved your life. And I need to know that when I succeed, it's because I earned it, not because someone felt obligated to help me." Matthew studied his face with an intensity that made Jason self-conscious. Finally, he spoke. "What if it's not about the job? What if it's just about getting to know each other?" "What do you mean? You saved my life." "Jason, that's not a small thing." Matthew hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "And I'd like to know who you are, not as a candidate, not as someone I owe a debt to, but just as a person. Could we do that? Have coffee sometimes, talk, be friends. Life rarely gives us clear signposts, but sometimes a stranger's eyes across a coffee shop can be the compass we never knew we needed." Their friendship began with cautious conversations over coffee, twice-weekly meetings that evolved from polite small talk to genuine connection. Matthew spoke of growing up as the son of Thomas Montgomery, the famously conservative CEO of Silicon Tech, and the complicated dance of being a gay man in his father's corporate shadow. Jason shared stories of the 3-year battle to adopt Tyler after Rachel's death, of courtrooms where judges questioned whether a single gay man could provide a proper home. "The system isn't built for families like ours." Jason explained during their 4th coffee meeting. "Rachel's parents fought me at first, said Tyler needed a normal family with a mother and father. But Rachel's will was clear, and eventually, the court agreed." He didn't mention the crushing legal bills that still followed him, or how close he'd come to losing Tyler during one particularly hostile hearing. Matthew listened with a thoughtfulness Jason rarely encountered, not the performative sympathy of colleagues, but genuine understanding. "My father believes the same thing," Matthew confessed. "He tolerates that I'm gay, long as I keep it private, his word, not mine. He doesn't know I'm seeing you, even just as friends. He'd immediately assume the worst." As autumn painted San Francisco in muted golds, their worlds gradually merged. First came the invitation for Matthew to join them at Golden Gate Park, where Tyler initially regarded the newcomer with suspicious eyes. Jason recognized his son's protective stance, the same wariness he'd shown with every new person since losing Rachel. The breakthrough came unexpectedly when Tyler mentioned his upcoming science fair project. "I want to make a robot that can navigate by itself, but Dad doesn't know programming," he said, a rare criticism of his father. Matthew's eyes lit up. "I studied computer science before switching to HR. What if I helped you build it?" The following weekend found them huddled over laptop and circuit boards in Jason's small living room, Matthew patiently explaining variables and loops while Tyler absorbed every word. Jason watched from the kitchen, something warm and unfamiliar blooming in his chest at the sight of his son's eager questions and Matthew's gentle answers. As October ended, West Bay Tech announced its final layoffs, Jason among them, despite his technical skills. "They're keeping the sales team and outsourcing development," he explained to Matthew that evening, voice steady despite the panic churning beneath. "I've got severance for 2 months, but after that..." Matthew studied him across the cafe table. "You've mentioned starting your own consulting business before. Maybe this is the universe pushing you." "The universe seems to enjoy pushing me off cliffs," Jason remarked dryly. "Starting a business requires capital, connections, clients, things I don't have." "You have connections," Matthew said simply. "Me. My father knows everyone in Bay Area tech. I could introduce you not as a favor, but because you're genuinely brilliant at solving problems others can't. I've seen your code. I've watched you debug Tyler's robot when even I was stumped." Jason's instinct was to refuse. Pride and independence had been his armor for years. But Tyler's face flashed in his mind, along with the custody agreement specifying financial stability. "Why would you do this?" Because you didn't walk past that alley, Matthew answered. And because the tech world needs more people who solve problems instead of just talking about them. 2 weeks later, CodePath Consulting was registered, with a logo designed by Tyler, a robot holding a wrench and code. Matthew's introductions led to Jason's first client, a struggling startup whose inventory system collapsed under unexpected growth. Jason's elegant solution brought 3 more referrals, then 5. By December, CodePath had 4 regular clients and enough income to bridge the gap until more projects arrived. The fear didn't disappear, but it receded enough for Jason to breathe. Their professional collaboration blurred into personal connection. Matthew attended Tyler's science fair, cheering louder than anyone when his navigation robot won second place. He brought dinner when Jason worked late on client projects, remembered Tyler's medication schedule, became the emergency contact at school when Jason couldn't be reached. One evening at the kitchen table, reviewing CodePath's finances, Jason caught Matthew watching him with an expression he couldn't decipher. "What?" he asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing," Matthew replied. "Then everything. 3 months ago, you were a stranger bleeding on my suit. Now I can't imagine a week without seeing you both." The words hung between them, charged with unspoken meaning. Jason looked down at the spreadsheets, heart racing. He'd built walls after Rachel died, after the custody battle, after every failed relationship where potential partners couldn't understand his priorities. The thought of lowering those walls terrified him. "Tyler has school tomorrow," Jason said finally, not meeting Matthew's eyes. "We should finish this later." But as he walked Matthew to the door, their hands brushed, and neither pulled away. The touch lasted only seconds, but it left Jason's skin tingling long after Matthew left. That night, as he tucked Tyler into bed, his son asked the question he'd been dreading. "Dad, do you like Matthew, like more than a regular friend?" Jason considered deflecting, then remembered his promise to always honor Tyler with truth. "I might," he admitted. "Would that be okay with you?" Tyler was quiet for a long moment. "He knows how to code better than you," he finally said, "and he laughs at your jokes even when they're not funny. Plus, he remembered my inhaler when you forgot." A child's practical assessment of compatibility that made Jason smile. "So that's a yes?" Jason asked. Tyler nodded solemnly. "Just don't kiss him in front of my friends. That would be embarrassing." Sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves become the very barriers that prevent us from finding the connections we most desperately need. The Italian restaurant in North Beach glowed with warm amber light, white tablecloths catching the flicker of candles. Matthew had chosen this place for their first official date, intimate, elegant, far from the tech crowds who might recognize the Montgomery name. Jason adjusted his collar, feeling underdressed despite Matthew's assurance that his blue button-down was perfect. "You look nervous," Matthew observed, his own features relaxed in a way Jason rarely saw. "More nervous than when you pitched to that venture capital firm last week." "That was business. This is, Jason trailed off, unsure how to define this evolution from friendship to something deeper. "This matters more." Matthew's eyes softened. "I've wanted this for months," he confessed. "Every coffee meeting, every weekend with Tyler, every late-night text, I kept finding more reasons to be near you. I was terrified of ruining what we had," Jason admitted. "After Rachel died, after the custody battle, I built walls to protect Tyler, to protect myself. Letting someone new in feels like tempting fate." Matthew reached across the table, his fingers interlacing with Jason's. "I'm not asking for perfection. I'm just asking for a chance to see where this goes, the 3 of us." That night, walking along the Embarcadero, the Bay Bridge lights reflecting on the water, they shared their first kiss. Simple, gentle, a promise rather than a demand. Jason felt something long dormant awakening the possibility that love could exist again in a different form. Their relationship grew quietly, like a secret garden. Tyler adapted with the resilience of children, delighted to have Matthew stay for movie nights and weekend breakfasts. The 3 established new rituals, Sunday coding sessions, pizza Fridays that fulfilled Jason's promise in an unexpected way, hikes in the Marin Headlands, where Tyler collected rocks and Matthew photographed landscapes. When Thomas Montgomery discovered his son was dating that consultant with the adopted child, his response was swift and cold. "You have a choice to make," he told Matthew during a tense dinner at the family mansion. "Your inheritance or this lifestyle experiment." Matthew returned to Jason's apartment that night, face drawn but resolved. "I chose," he said simply. "I chose us." By spring, CodePath had grown enough to warrant a small office space. Tyler designed business cards featuring his robot logo, proudly distributing them at every opportunity. Matthew established a foundation at Silicon Tech supporting LGBT families, a quiet rebellion that gradually shifted the company culture despite his father's initial resistance. On the anniversary of the earthquake, Jason stood in his new office, looking at two framed photographs on his desk. The first showed Rachel holding baby Tyler, her smile radiant despite the illness that would eventually claim her. The second captured a more recent moment: Jason, Matthew, and Tyler at Ocean Beach, all three squinting into the sun and grinning. His phone buzzed with a text from Matthew. "Tyler wants pizza tonight, bringing it home with extra pepperoni. Love you both." Jason smiled, typing back, "We'll be waiting. Love you too." The earthquake had shaken his world apart 1 year ago. He'd thought saving Matthew had cost him everything: the job, the stability, the future he'd planned. But standing in his own office, building a business he was proud of, loving a man who saw him clearly and chose him anyway, raising a son who was thriving, he realized how wrong he'd been. It hadn't cost him anything. It had given him a choice. And every choice after that: starting his business, opening his heart, building a life that was entirely his own, those were all his decisions. Made not out of desperation or obligation, but out of courage and hope. The earthquake had shaken his world apart, but piece by piece, he'd built something better from the rubble, something that was his, not because someone gave it to him, but because he'd had the strength to reach for it. Have you ever made a decision that seemed like a sacrifice, only to discover it was actually opening the door to something better? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes our greatest losses lead to unexpected gains. If we're brave enough to walk through the door, don't forget to subscribe to Heart Stories for more powerful tales of resilience, healing, and the unexpected twists that remind us why hope still matters.